Hey everyone, George here and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most beautiful fish I think out there, and it's one that I don't see very often in too many tanks, and we're going to talk about that fish today. That's the killifish. Now the killifish is found on 3 different continents, and there's over 350 varieties of this particular species. So it is a well-known fish, but it has kind of a bad rap as being a difficult fish sometimes, and that could not be further from the truth. So today we're going to tackle the reasons why you don't find this fish too often and why people will not buy this fish sometimes, and try to understand a little bit more about this fish and how you can keep this fish in not only your community tank, but you can keep a species tank of it as well. You can do this in smaller tanks, larger tanks. This is a very versatile fish that I think that if you get to understand it and know it a little bit better, you're really going to like it. So stick with me today, and we're going to talk about this fish, and we're going to get to that in just a second here. So the fish I want to talk about today is the Gardneri killifish, which is found right near Nigeria, or the Cameroon area more specifically. And as you can see, it is an absolutely beautiful fish. When you see this male here, you can see this absolutely gorgeous coloration that they have. Sort of a turquoise blue body with red spotting and veining on it, as well as a yellow dorsal fin and caudal fin, as well as yellow and red stripes on its tail. Now the female, which you're seeing right here in the front of the tank, is more of a gold or yellow color that is not as vibrant obviously as the male, but she gets to be more of a gold, I would say, color than yellow, and does have the brown spotting or brownish red spotting on her body as well, but clearly not as vibrant as the male. Now there is a second female, as you can see at the top there, that is more of a gray color, and the reason for that is that particular fish has not reached sexual maturity, and if she hasn't reached sexual maturity, they're just not going to color up the way they should. So it will take a little time, but eventually the fish will color up in the tank. Now when I come back here, we're going to talk about why this fish is not very common in tanks, and why I think it's a fish that is overlooked, and why I think it would be an absolutely great asset for any community tank or species tank. They don't take up a lot of room. Now this particular tank here is a lot bigger than they really need to have, but because it is a community tank, I really think that they really do have to have the space in this particular tank, but we'll talk about more of that when I come back. When we talk about keeping these killifish here, one of the things we want to keep in mind is that they are a fish that does require a lot of plants and a lot of hardscaping in the tank for them to do really well. Now temperature wise, we're looking at anywheres from to be honest with you, 72 to 81 degrees. If you're doing breeding, you want to get to that higher temperature, because that's going to create an environment for these fish to want to breed. Now I'm not interested in that because I'm keeping these fish in a community tank. I do have a male and 2 females, as I said in here, but that is simply because I want the fish to sort of group together. I didn't want to have just one male in here and no females, because at the store where I purchased these, the yellow female and the male were a mating pair, so I did not want to separate them. Now, one of the reasons why this fish, I think, gets a bad rap is because it is one of the more expensive fish out there, and if I hadn't mentioned this already, they run between $10 and $12 per fish, and that can be quite expensive for the average person who's in the hobby. And that in itself can prevent some of your large box pet stores or your mom and pop stores from keeping these fish at all. And I think that if you look at your specialty stores, this is probably where you're going to find these guys. And you can actually order them too. A lot of stores will have the ability to get these fish in and order them for you if you're interested in them. And I think they're a great asset to any tank. So if you are interested in doing that, just contact your local supplier. If it's someone that you can trust, have them get some of these guys in. There are several varieties of these that are absolutely beautiful. As I said, they can be found on 3 different continents, and there's absolutely limitless colors to these guys. In fact, there's about 350 varieties of the Killi fish, and they're all really, really different from each other as far as colors go. I just think they're absolutely spectacular. Now, one of the drawbacks, as I said, is that these fish do not live very long, and this could be the other reason why people don't want to pay $10 to $12 for a fish that doesn't live more than 2 to 2.5 years. But I think they're an absolutely spectacular asset to any tank, and really worth the $10 to $12 that you would spend on them to have them be kept in your tank. As far as food goes with these fish, they're pretty much going to eat just about anything. But if they are kind of picky when you first get them, one of the first things you want to do is try to get them to eat either bloodworms or what I call bug bites, which is a common food out on the market today. And they do like insects in the wild and worms, so that is their natural diet, and they will eat those readily. If you can try getting them onto pellets and flake, and usually within a week or two you can be very successful at doing that. These fish have already gotten to the point from the buyer who has already started them on flake foods, pellets, and other kinds of really good quality fish food. And that's something I really want to talk about and emphasize a lot with these fish. If you want good coloration with them, don't buy really cheap and crappy food, because if you do, the fish isn't going to color up very well, and they're not going to live very long. The important thing to note with these fish is you want to have very nutrient-rich foods, and you do want to try to feed them live food occasionally. So even if it's just the occasional once-a-week snack or something like that, bloodworms or blackworms, any of those kinds of things are going to be something that these fish are really going to go after and really enjoy. So if you can, like I said, get them on pellets or flake food that's high in omega-3s and also very high in other nutrients, and you will find that these fish are extremely happy and will live the full 2 to 2.5 years of their lifespan. Now, I know that is not a very long time for a fish to live that you spend that kind of money on, as I said, especially when you look at this particular tank and you see that we have these rummy-nosed tetras in here that can live 5 to 7 years. That seems kind of odd that you would pay $3.99 for a rummy-nosed tetra and get 5 to 7 years of life out of it, and then only get 2 to 2.5 years out of this killifish. So I think that's one of the reasons why you don't see these in people's tanks very much. Also, most people who have fish tanks do not scape their tanks as well as most of the people that probably follow this channel do. So, a well-scaped tank, like I said, with a lot of plants, a lot of wood, a lot of rock, a lot of area for this fish to hide, is really going to make this a really good environment for these fish to live in. And that's just really, really important to keep in mind if you're going to keep these fish. Now, we're going to come back and we're going to talk a little bit about breeding, and we're going to talk about pH and other things that are related to the water parameters, and we're going to get to that in just a second here. So when we're talking about water parameters or what the needs are for these fish, let's start with temperature. I think I mentioned that a little bit in the beginning of this video, but we're looking at a fish that really enjoys a temperature of approximately, the lowest would be around 72 to 73 degrees, and goes all the way up to about 81 degrees if you are planning on breeding these fish. Now, I would suggest that you keep your tank, depending on what other fish you're keeping with these, they will tolerate temperatures up to 81 degrees. And this tank right here is set at, it says 83 on there, but the temperature right now is actually fluctuating. I have this set at 81 because I do that on purpose. Number one, to keep the other fish in the tank in a warmer temperature, which keeps ick situations and that kind of thing down. And also I have found that with good water changes and the higher temperatures, that the plants seem to do better at not having algae blooms that break out. There's all kinds of different kinds of algae, obviously, and the most obvious one would be that brown algae that we typically see on a new tank. Now, this is not a new tank. This is a well-established tank that's been around for a while. Now, what I mean by that is it's a recent build, but all of the substrate and the filtration in the back of this tank were taken from another tank, and so we had an automatic quick cycle on this after about 24 to 48 hours, and as you can see, the water is crystal clear and quite beautiful, and the fish are all doing really well in here. Now, as far as pH goes, these guys can handle a pH anywhere from 6.0 to 7.0. They really do like that softer, more acidic water, and that seems to be where they absolutely thrive the most. If you are in a place where your water is harder, you can get products out there that you can neutralize that. Seachem has a regulator neutralizer that does bring pH down to a neutral 7.0, and so if you want to keep these fish and you have hard water, you still can do that without a lot of problems. So as far as other aspects of the water parameters in a tank, you really want to be careful to make sure that you are doing regular water changes. I suggest that you do at least 1/4 of a water change in the tank per week to keep these fish in top shape. They are sensitive to ammonia spikes, so they are sensitive to nitrite and nitrate spikes, and all of that can really be something that you can avoid if you are watching your water changes and making sure that you are doing them on a regular basis. Now, in a tank this size, which is a 20-gallon cube, you will find that it's really not hard to do a water change. It literally takes 5 to 10 minutes to change 1/4 of the water in here. And you're going to see also that these fish, with those water changes, are really going to act just really, really amazingly active in the tank, and you're going to see them more, and that's basically what we want to do. We don't want them hiding or becoming a fish that doesn't come out where you can see them. If you're going to pay $10 to $12 for a fish, one of the things you absolutely don't want to have happen is have that fish hiding all the time. Now, when I come back, we're going to talk about breeding a little bit and the kinds of environment that you need for breeding and what I recommend, and we'll do that in just a second here. So if you are thinking about breeding this fish, a couple of things to keep in mind is that I would not try to breed these fish in a community tank. I think that that is just going to be problematic in itself because of obvious reasons. The fry are, if they do make it past the egg stage, they are likely to be eaten by anything that's large enough in the tank, which with the rummy-nosed tetras and the bloodfin tetras that are in this tank, they will, as I said, be preyed on pretty easily, and you will not be able to have a successful breeding program in a community tank. So my recommendation is to have a tank that is laid out pretty much like what you're seeing here, but to have these fish pretty much alone. You can have some cories, you can have some autocinclids, and those kinds of fish help you to keep algae down. Even Siamese algae eaters are going to be fine. They're not going to go after the fry when they hatch, and it's just going to be a much more successful, I can't talk, it's going to be a much more successful situation for you to breed these fish in their own tank. So I would, if you're going to breed, have a species-specific tank and one that has plenty of room. I would not go with less than 20 gallons. Now, I have seen people breed these fish in a 10-gallon tank, and I just think that's not really enough room for these fish to have a successful breeding program. I really believe that if you're going to do that, that you really need to keep in mind that these fish are going to be really stressed out in a smaller tank like that, because they're going to feel like they have to protect their territory more, even though there are not other fish in the tank with them. Sometimes they will even have problems with a second female in the tank. The female that is protective of the eggs will sometimes even be a little bit feisty with the male and the other female that's in with them. So you want to be careful to have, like I said, a species-specific tank. Once breeding does take place, I do recommend that you move the fry to another location, get them on, really small brine or other kinds of live bait that are small enough for these fish to eat. Now, they will lay eggs that are pretty much going to be laid over a 3 to 4 day period, and hatching takes place in about 12 days from the time that the eggs are laid in the tank. Now, basically, these guys are egg scatterers, so they don't really keep their eggs in a clumped area like a lot of fish do. They do scatter the eggs around in a area of the tank along the substrate, pretty much just letting the eggs basically lay on the bottom of the tank plate, and so that in itself can be somewhat problematic if you are keeping these in a community tank, because obviously other fish in that tank are going to be able to find those eggs very easily and consider them food. So if, like I said, if you're planning on breeding these fish, the couple of things that you want to keep in mind, again, is to have a well-planted tank just like the one that you're seeing here. but also, like I said, make it species specific, with the exception of a few cories, maybe some, like I said, some Siamese algae eaters, and even some autocinclids. They're not going to bother these eggs really that much, if at all. And the chances of it are pretty slim because these fish are going to be very protective of those eggs and they will run those fish off. Now, one of the things you have to keep in mind when you are breeding these fish is you want to raise the temperature in the tank to somewhere between 78 and 81 degrees. Now, the higher the temperature, the more likely you are to stimulate the laying of eggs and the spawning that happens between the male and the female. And a lot of people, if you don't have a setup like you have in this particular tank here, do these sort of mop type situations. I don't like that. I think it's ugly. I think it's really not a natural environment for these fish to breed in. They will do that, and some people find that convenient. I really like the natural way of breeding fish in a tank that is fully scaped, fully planted, and looks like the tank that you're going to keep your fish in long term. And I think that the fish themselves find that to be a much more conducive environment for breeding. So when we come back, we're going to do pretty much a summary of what we talked about. We're going to hit on some of the basic points about the killifish that I think are important. And we'll do that in just a second here when I come back. So stick with me. So in summary, as I said, a couple of things that we want to hit on. As I said, the killifish, this particular species is really sometimes very difficult to find, and you're not really going to find them in big box stores or mom and pop stores. As I said, the reason for that is they can be an expensive fish, and because of the name, and I don't know if I hit on this earlier or not, but because of the name Killi, people get the wrong idea. Even though they're beautiful fish and they want them, they really find that the word Killi sort of deters them from buying the fish. Now, if you think about what the word Killi means, it's a Dutch, really a Dutch word that means canal or sort of a area in which you would find a water flow that is off to the side of like a ditch or something like that. It was kind of hard for me to explain because that's really where the word derives from, and people don't understand that. But in Nigeria or Cameroon, where these fish are found, really they are found in areas like that are very slow moving water. There's not a huge flow of water in that area, and so they're kind of like ditches or canals in that part of Cameroon, where this particular fish, which is called the Gardneri killi, is found. Now, one of the other things that we didn't talk about that I really wanted to hit on is these fish can sometimes be very different in color just 20 or 30 miles from each other in a country like Nigeria or Cameroon. They can literally have completely different colorations to them as far as the tone of their body and the brightness of their fins and so forth. So they really can run the gamut as far as coloration goes. There really is no limitations to that. As I said, they're found on 3 different continents, and there's about 350 varieties of killifish that you can choose from. Now, not all of them obviously are sold in stores, but if you are really into these fish, you can really look around. Usually in your area, you can find somebody that specializes in specialty fish that are on the high end. and they can get these fish for you. Now, as I said, these fish run anywhere from $10 to $12 a piece, and that can be a deterrent as well, simply because, like I said, the lifespan of these fish, if you study it before you buy them, is going to be maxed out at about 2.5 years. Usually in marginal conditions or in reasonable conditions, you're going to get about 2 years out of them. Now, in a tank like this, that is a little bit bigger and is in perfect shape and will always be in perfect shape, because I always keep my tanks like that, we could get between 2 to 2.5 years out of these fish as far as their lifespan goes. So if you're thinking about buying these fish, keep that in mind, because that can be a deterrent to buying them, because most people think, well, gee, the rummy-nosed tetra, as I said earlier, is a $2.49 to $3.99 fish, or the bloodfin tetra that's in here, also around the same price, lives 5 to 7 years. So why would you spend that much money on a fish that only lives 2.5 years? Well, if you look at these fish and the beautiful coloration, which is really hard to capture on camera because they don't really sit still. They're not a fish that is just going to sit there and let you photograph them. There is occasionally times when they will sit still and you can get some beautiful photographs of them. If you follow me on Instagram, I will try to take some snapshots of these fish and post them, because I really think if I use a higher end camera and I can get these fish in a situation where they are just settled in for a little while, usually in the early morning or late evening part of the day, I'll take some great pictures of these and post them on Instagram with a little bit more information about them, so you can find them there as well. And that information will be down here below. Again, talking about the pH and some of the other water parameters, it's really important that these fish are kept in a pH of somewhere between 6 and 7.0. They really like that softer acidic water, as I said. If you get above that, they're really not going to do as well. Like I said, there are some neutralizers or regulators out there. Seachem makes a great product to do that, which will help you to keep your tank at that 7.0 or neutral point of pH. Also, keeping in mind that water changes are very, very important to these fish. They are in all tanks as far as I'm concerned. I do regular water changes of a quarter of the tank at least once a week, sometimes twice a week. So my tanks are always in pristine shape. This cuts down on so many different things, not just helping your fish to have a very healthy environment in which to thrive in, but also keeping your plants from getting certain kinds of algae. And with that being done, the water changes on a regular basis, which I can't emphasize that enough. People tell me, oh, I've gone 6 months without doing a water change in my tank, and I'm like, why would you do that? And there really isn't an explanation for it. I think it's kind of a laziness thing. If you're not doing at least a quarter a week of a water change in your tank, then you're really not doing your fish any service, and they're going to be healthier in the long run, and their lifespan is going to be extended. So that's very important. I don't want to insult anyone out there who doesn't do these kinds of water changes, because there's a lot of people that are going to argue with me that that kind of water changes are not necessary. To me, I think it's very important, and I've had a lot of success with it. And if you look at my gallery of tanks in just this room alone, which you can't see the whole room, but there's about 9 different tanks in this room. All of them are pristine and are doing very, very well. Now, it wasn't always like that because, like everyone else, when I got into the hobby, I had to learn by making mistakes about how to keep water parameters in check. And one of the best ways I think to do that, as I said, is to do regular water changes. So I'm not going to harp on that anymore. Let's get back to talking about the environment in which these fish thrive in. If you look at this particular tank here, we're talking about a 20-gallon water box cube, and this, I think, is one of the most beautiful tanks out on the market. It does have the Starfire glass, and that's my phone, so I'm going to ignore that for right now. But it does have the Starfire glass in here, and makes it much more clearer to see the fish and to absolutely see them in their best environment. Now, one of the things that you want to keep in mind with the Starfire glass is that it is a low iron glass, and that means that the tank is going to cost you a bit more money. I think that to see your fish in a clearer environment is really important, and so I'm willing to pay that. You may not have a budget for that, and that's okay, because regular glass, unless someone comes to your home or your gallery and is looking at your glass, they probably aren't going to notice the difference between standard glass and low iron glass unless they are professionals at scaping and keep a lot of fish themselves. Then they'll notice it, but that's not a big deal for most people. And again, as I said, low iron glass is very nice to have, but it is not something that is absolutely necessary to keep these fish. A well-planted, hardscape tank is so important for these fish, and I think any fish, to be honest with you. The more plants that you have, the less problems that you're going to have with water parameters. Plants are a natural filtration system for any tank. The more plants that you can put in there, the better. Now, this is, like I said, a fairly new scape here, but this tank was seeded with substrate from another 20-gallon, and also the filtration is in here, came from another tank as well. So we pretty much had an automatic cycle on this tank, and it's been set up now for roughly a month or so, and everyone's doing really well. I haven't lost a single fish in here. As I said, I'm keeping rummy nose tetras in here, I think 7 of those, and 7 of the bloodfin tetras. Now, the reason why I did that is because I knew I was going to get these killifish, and killifish will do best as far as territorial and that kind of thing if you get fish where the main body of the fish is a more dull, kind of grayish color. They can have the beautiful, rummy nose traits as far as the red nose and the red fins on them, as well as the bloodfin, who is also going to have a similar marking on their body. They don't have the red nose, but they do have the beautiful red fins on their body. You're going to notice that the killifish is going to do much better with fish that have these traits to them, simply because they don't recognize them as a threat. I never see any fighting going on or territorial disputes in this particular tank, simply because I planned ahead on that. And I think that's something that's really important for all of us to do, is if you're going to keep a specific kind of fish, study up on that fish and what their needs are, what other kind of tank mates are going to be good for that particular fish. And as I said, I did the rummy nose tetra and the bloodfin tetra specifically because I knew that that was going to cut down on any territorial disputes or problems with the killifish in here, because they're not going to be territorial, because they don't see these fish color-wise as a threat to the male protecting his females or spawning and that sort of thing. Like I said, I don't recommend keeping a male and 3 females in a tank like this for the purposes of spawning. If you are going to keep a male and 3 females in a community tank like this, they probably will spawn, but don't expect that the fry are going to survive, because the other fish are going to see that just as an expensive meal, and they're not going to last very long. As I said, they are egg scatterers, so they do not lay their eggs in clumps on a rock or a piece of wood or a leaf or anything like that. They pretty much will lay their eggs on the substrate and protect a small area in which they've laid them. And as I said, they lay their eggs in a 3 to 5 day period, and hatching takes place at approximately 12 days after the eggs were hatched. So if you do have that 5 day period in which they're laying the eggs, you are going to see these fish hatch over a 5 day period, meaning if they laid them in 5 days and you have 12 days before they hatch, you could run anywhere up to like 17 days before you see all of the fish hatch. Now, as I said, I am not keeping these fish for breeding purposes. If you are going to have a species-specific tank, you should set it up the same exact way. I don't like these mops and all this other stuff. It's not necessary. If you have enough planting like you're seeing in this tank here and enough hardscape, then these fish are going to do really well with spawning in these conditions. They will find a spot that they can hide their eggs in the tank, and they don't have that competition or concern about other fish coming in and eating those eggs. As I said, you can keep some smaller quarries with these without having any problems. If you're keeping a species-specific tank, autocinclids, and also the Siamese algae eater. Snails, nearite snails, or mystery snails are fine for this. I would not, however, if you're going to keep these fish and have a species-specific tank that you're going to allow breeding in, I would not have a pleco. That is really a fish that is going to be very disturbing and very disruptive to the spawning and the hatching of the fry. So that's just something I would avoid. So in summary, don't be afraid of these fish. They're absolutely beautiful fish. They're, I said, a little bit more expensive, between $10 and $12 a piece. And that can seem like a really expensive fish for people who are on a budget. For someone like me who is really, really into the hobby and keeps a lot of different tanks around their home and their gallery, I don't mind spending that kind of money on a fish that only lives 2 to 2.5 years. And again, like I said, that is one of the other problems that people have, is they look at that fish as, wow, I'm going to invest $10 to $12 into a fish that's only going to have a lifespan of 2 to 2.5 years under the best of conditions. Well, to me, that's fine. To most people, that's probably not. And as I said, that's probably one of the reasons. I need to shift here a little bit because my knees are killing me. But one of the reasons why you're not going to find these in big box stores or mom and pop stores, and you're simply going to find them more in a specialty type store, because of the price. And even in specialty stores, when people see that name Killi on there, for whatever reason, they get the wrong impression of what that means. So if you're going to buy a fish, read and do a little bit of research about that fish so that you have an understanding of not only what their needs are, but where they come from, why they're named what they are. Sometimes the name can be very deceiving. So anyways, thank you for joining me today. I hope you will hit that like button. You'll hit the subscribe and also leave a comment down below here. I love listening to your comments, or not listening, but actually reading your comments and interacting with you and getting back to you, because sometimes there's things that I miss that need to be talked about, and I like to get that information from people so that I understand the species that I'm talking about a little bit better. And also maybe I said something that you didn't understand exactly, and I can explain that, or you have content that you want to add because you are keeping these fish, or have been maybe keeping this fish for a very long time, and I want to learn from you as well. So anything that you have to contribute, just leave it in that comment section down below, and I will get back to you and answer your comments as quickly and as best I can. If anyone else has a comment and I'm not able to answer the questions, I'm sure there are other people who are following me on this channel that will be able to answer some of those questions for you. So don't be afraid to leave a comment that maybe I can't help you with, but somebody else will over time. So again, thank you so much for watching and spending time with me today. I know this video went a little bit longer, but because of this particular fish, I really wanted to make sure that I did hit on a lot of different points because these fish, as I said, get a really bad rap as being a fish that is difficult, and the word Killi in front of their name also is a deterrent for many people, especially people who are, I want to use the word ignorant, because ignorant just means lack of knowledge. It doesn't mean that you're not intelligent or you're stupid or anything like that. It's just really a benign word that means that you are not aware of certain facts. So I did want to make sure that I touched on these fish a little bit more and talked about, just about everything I could about where they came from, about the price of these fish, their environment, their food, the breeding, everything that I could hit on that I think is important for you to go out and buy some of these fish, which I really encourage you to do. Thank you again for joining me today. Don't forget to hit that bell. Not sure if it's up here or up here, but when I do edit this video, I will make sure that it is placed, I think, up in this area right here. Sometimes things are backwards on a camera, obviously. Well, it might be up here. But anyways, hit on that bell because it does give you an opportunity to know when new content comes out. And we do have a ton of stuff coming out over the next couple of weeks. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So thank you again for joining me. Go out and get yourself some Killi fish. Like I said, there's a ton of varieties out there. If you're looking at these and researching them and you want a specific one, ask your specialty store if they can get them. There's always some place that you can get them, even if you buy them online and you're willing to pay the extra money for the shipping. They're a great fish to have, and they're absolutely beautiful. So again, thank you, and we'll talk again soon.